May well look back on this moment in time as a seminal one. What does it mean for our politics, and also what does it mean for our economy? Owen Nkomo is a market commentator. He's also the executive director at the Inkunzi Wealth Group, and of course we're joined also by host of SAFM Sunrise, a political analyst Stephen Grootes. Good evening to you, gentlemen.
Good evening.
I suppose we can start off with a moment of levity and say Casper Nyovesta called this a little while ago.
Yeah, unlike Tito and Mboweni a few months ago.
I mean, firstly, the politics of this are not insignificant, are they, Stephen?
No, I mean, I think there's several things to say here. I mean, first, and I think this is a really important point and worth almost taking a moment over, is how Nhlanhla Nene, I think, will go down in history, in my memory at least, as the first cabinet minister since 1994 to resign because of alleged wrongdoing with no evidence against him, and also just simply resign rather than being forced out or being reshuffled. I can't think of anyone who did anything in a cabinet before 1994 out of principle either. So I think we're looking at a very historic moment.
Look, it brings to question a number of issues. Firstly, did he resign purely because of the reasons you've just stated, or is there more that we may still not know, particularly because in terms of the accusations the EFF have been throwing about for a number of weeks?
Well, yes, and I think this is perhaps more, not so much about the meetings with the Grootes, although I think those are important and singular in this regard because he lied about them. But I think perhaps also the Mail and Guardian Amubongani story on Friday about his son Siyabonga Nene, again, no evidence of illegality or criminality that we're aware of. But I think the big story would be, are there some Smolanyala skeletons there? And that is what Nhlanhla Nene was really afraid of. I suppose, though, that would bring another question, which is, why not wait until they come out? Or maybe at the Zondo Commission tell us then. There were other options. And I think, and other people have mentioned this, what's really curious is that when Julius Malema stood up in the National Assembly and said essentially to Nhlanhla Nene's face, we have something on you, Nhlanhla Nene himself did not respond in any way. And that might have been the moment to do it. I'd be very interested in what he was thinking at the time as to why there was no formal response.
From the moment that apology was issued on Friday, I said there was blood in the water. But it also raises the questions, I mean, he may have lied to a journalist. We've got members of cabinet that have lied to courts.
Well, yes, and I mean, what's fascinating here is what didn't happen today. We didn't have a big reshuffle. I mean, if you look at some of the people who are accused of lying to courts, I mean, Malusi Gigaba, the Supreme Court of Appeal, as I understand it, is now supposed to deal with an appeal. The Constitutional Court has refused, and the High Court has found he did lie under oath. We also have Badabile Dlamini, I mean, the first person holding executive office to have to pay costs and legal costs in their personal capacity because of the social grants payments fiasco, I think is the word that we're allowed to use. So certainly there are other people there, and I think that raises questions about how Nhlanhla Nene has been almost forced to resign in a way when other people are allowed to stay in. But I think this also suggests that perhaps the situation in the ANC is such that President Ramaphosa feels he's not actually able to move against them yet, or in typical Ramaphosa fashion, he's biding his time.
We'll see how it unfolds. Owen, of course, the markets seem to like this. The rand firming up slightly on the news of this. Listen, he's an experienced individual, obviously as governor of the Reserve Bank, a former Labour minister, but he's coming back to an entirely different environment to the one he left when he was in high office.
Yes, most definitely. A lot of things have changed since Tito Mboweni was in government. And firstly, you look at the debt of the country has continued to increase, unemployment has continued to worsen, and I think there's so much that's happened in the past 10 odd years that he has to adjust to. But I think he has kept abreast with what's happening in politics and the economy of the country. I think it's going to be very easy for him to fit in. You've seen some of the rhetorical stuff that he keeps posting out there. You can see he's concerned about South Africa. He wants the right decisions to be made for the country, and I'm hoping that him working with President Ramaphosa will possibly drive the country into the right direction. And I think for us, we've been saying that we don't care who replaces Nhlanhla Nene, or rather we don't care whether he stays or goes, as long as if the story is that he must go, it must be a worthy replacement. And I think that Tito Mboweni is actually worthy to replace Nhlanhla Nene.
So he's a worthy replacement, but obviously with the midterm budget coming up in a matter of weeks, he's not going to do too much to try and tweak what already has been laid as the groundwork by Nhlanhla Nene and other Treasury officials.
Yes, I imagine that's the case. I mean, a lot of work has been done already for the midterm budget statement, but he might have his own ideas as well. You know, he's got autonomy to decide as a minister how that department should be run. Des van Rooyen had all of but 3 days, but he made some
lot one can do in 4
exactly.
days.
So there's a lot you can do in about 2 weeks, says Tito Mboweni.
How does this play out with the ratings agencies? We know the buzz phrases, political stability, policy certainty. How do they respond to this?
I think it's going to be a positive response in my view because of the individual that's replacing Minister Nene and the fact that the president has taken a very quick decision. Some people are complaining that Nhlanhla Nene should have been fired the day Amapungane released that article. But I think it's, if you think about it seriously, relative to other decisions that are lingering that Stephen has spoken about, it's a quick turnaround time. And I think the ratings agencies are going to be very happy with the decision made. But there's still a lot of work to be done. We can't fool ourselves. You know, he comes in during a very difficult time in our economy. He's got a whole lot of work that he must do to get us out of the recession that we're in.
Of course, on the back of the president's stimulus package that he announced just a few weeks ago, there's been a lot of reaction in terms of where South Africa is going economically. Let's look at a screen now to look at a map of what the rand has been doing. The levels that it flirted with in terms of 15 to the dollar at one stage today, but already by end of business firming up quite nicely. All of those have to be positive signs. I mean, having gone up to 15, ending at around 14.70 or thereabouts. Those are good signs?
Yes, definitely good signs, but we're still a long way to go, Bongani. I mean, we need to go and hit that 14 number and go back to the lower 13s if we're to deal with the impact of the fuel price that's going up so much. I think, Tito Mboweni will be very unpleasantly surprised by the amount of work that he has to do now. Back then when it was Tito Mboweni, Thabo Mbeki and Trevor Manuel.
The 3 TMs.
Yeah, the 3 TMs. Things were a little bit better. I mean, the rand was trading at 7. It's literally trading at 100% lower than where it was. He's got a lot of work to do. Let's give them time together with the president to work this stimulus package into fruition. It's going to take time as well. I think it's time to implement. But for me, I think the president has now got ammunition to make some decisions he's been holding back, and I hope he's going to use this ammunition. And Nhlanhla Nene, I guess he's a gentleman in politics. He's made a mistake and he's owned up and is out of there. He doesn't want to impede the processes, and I think he should be recommended for that.
Well, he'll be a gentleman if that's all there is to it. Of course, it's early days. We'll see what the EFF has to say in terms of its files. Stephen, talk to me then about the political opportunity this presents the president, particularly in the fact that Tito Mboweni, as I said earlier, has not been tainted by any association with the Zuma years. Is this, in a way, part of really now getting down and dirty and cleaning up?
I think what's really fascinating is that the president did not pick any of the people who'd been bandied about on Sunday, and various people, including Ranjani Munsami speaking on SFM yesterday, said, the names that were being put out there in terms of particularly, I think, Barbara Creasy, the Gauteng Finance MEC, were not just appearing out of thin air. There was a political motive there. And I think if, for example, a Barbara Creasy, who's been in Gauteng since 1994, I think it is, in terms of the legislature, but also has had no claims or criticisms against her in terms of claims of corruption ever, but would surely, after all of that time in Gauteng, be close to the leader of the Gauteng ANC, the former leader now, Paul Mashatile, and therefore as well, in a way, to David Mabuza, that group of people in the ANC. And so, in a way, I think that what Ramaphosa has done is sidestepped all of the kind of names that were being thrust around. And I think he's done that deliberately. I think he's gone for someone who he sees as completely economically orthodox. I mean, if you want someone to explain why inflation targeting is important, there are really two people who do it in the country very well and very firmly. And one of them is Tito Mboweni and the other is the governor himself, Lesetja Kganyago. And so what you have is the president sidestepping all of these other potential problems. I'm very interested as well, though, that he did not today fill the vacancy that was left by the sad passing of Edna Molewa. And I think that suggests that actually he wasn't quite ready for this. He might have been sort of gearing up for perhaps a bigger reshuffle, but the medium-term budget policy statement being, I think, just 2 weeks away now, I think that makes life complicated. And so, in a way, despite having to act with haste, he's managed to avoid any potential problems for him in the future.
Well, let's talk rands and cents, Owen. I mean, it comes into an environment where we're talking about particularly land reform, this free higher education. There are all of these things that he needs to find the money for, notwithstanding the shambles, you might argue, argue SARS finds itself in?
Yeah, it's got definitely so much work to do, and I imagine that we're going to yet have another commission of inquiry into what's going on at Treasury. There's been, question marks around the PIC and how it's operating, and whether or not the financing of some of these transactions is questionable. And I think we will see Ubaba going out there and saying, let us continue to dig deep into the PIC, let's dig deep into Treasury, and have a look at all this wasteful expenditure that's happening around the country in the various departments. And you mentioned the land story. I'm surprised that Mr. Mboweni came back, because I thought he was gone out just to farm, etc. But he's back now. I guess maybe that's a sign that the land story is going to be a long one.
But all those things he's going to need to deal with, particularly as Stephen said, perhaps it's more orthodox in terms of how he would approach these things. No one would call him a populist by any means.
Not a chance.
What does he do? What script do you think he'll follow?
I'm very excited that Tito Mboweni is back, because he used to be very stern and tough when he delivered his monthly interest rate decisions. He was well considered, and he was an all-round thinker, and he never dilly-dallied around things. And I think that he's going to make the right decisions where he believes that expenditure must be shifted or expenditure must be reduced, etc. I believe we're going to see a different method of running our finances because of the experience that we've had with Tito Mboweni when he was Reserve Bank governor. But needless to say, like I've said before, it's not going to be very easy for him, but I think he's got what it takes to lead the ministry.
Stephen, of course, the EFF are going to be glowing about this, aren't they?
Well, they are. They're, already claiming victory on SAFM, and I'm sure with you in a few moments. And I think there's several things to say about that. The one is that what I'm sure President Ramaphosa's greatest nightmare must be is that he is seen to lose one minister basically through a series of events started by some tweets from Julius Malema, the EFF commander-in-chief. What would happen if he were to appoint, say, 10 new ministers in a big reshuffle, and 2 weeks down the line, Malema starts tweeting about another one of them? And I think that is really his greatest nightmare. I think he's probably managed to sidestep that, because Tito Mboweni, through his public life, through what he's done, has been quite and I mean this in the friendliest way, a transparent individual. Someone who people know about. I don't think there are any skeletons that people don't know about. Yes, we know he was chairman of, I think it was a mining company. We know that he's done these things. So there's really nothing that Ramaphosa needs to worry about there. I think the EFF will also try and keep this going. They're going to try and keep this role going heading into the elections. I think on some levels that might be quite difficult, because I think they are going to make more promises, and they're going to have to live up to those promises. It's one thing for the spokesperson, for example, Dr. Mboweni Ndlozi, to say the reason we're against Nhlanhla Nene is because he lied. They might have to show that some of the things they've said are not lies. That might be difficult.
Yeah, because there is a concern, as I raised earlier, that we still may not know if there's more to this other than not telling the truth about the meetings he held with the Guptas. But does it change, the tone of what is now going to be expected ethically, morally, and maybe even legally from our political leaders?
Optimistically, yes. I think the real story, though, and the real problem is still that we are living with the divided ANC that emerged from Nasrec. And I think that is what really makes life quite complicated here. If there had been a stronger mandate for President Ramaphosa, he would be better able to act. But there isn't, and he is bound by that. And I think that is really where the complexities start to lie. I have no doubt that if he could act against Bathabile Dlamini, or if he could act against some of the other people who've been named in all of these things, in the Gupta leak emails, against the Home Affairs Minister Malusi Gigaba, I'm sure that he would. I think he
Does he play it safely until the election and have that in the bag and then make his decisions then?
Well, yes, I think for two reasons. One, and it's very common to sort of hear this, Ramaphosa's strength will be determined by how well he does in the elections, and that's true. What we should not forget is just the elections themselves through the campaign might well unite the ANC behind him. And elections do that to the ANC. The former Secretary General Gwede Mantashe used to argue against having only elections every 5 years. He said, we as the ANC need them to sort of unify ourselves. And I'm obviously praising there. So I think on one level, no matter what happens, the ANC should come out of the elections more unified than it is now. And that's kind of what he's waiting for. But I think there are other things as well. We're still waiting for a National Prosecuting Authority head. I have to say I'm slightly mystified by that. You would think that is something that he can act on now, and just the appointment of that person will send a strong message. The Hawks also have a new head, and yet we haven't seen any sort of high-profile arrests. There might well be investigations going on in the background, but the politics needs them to happen in public, and that's not what's happening. And then the last thing I would say on this is that the Zondo Commission, have been warning that the political impact of the Zondo Commission won't wait for the finding.
Yeah.
We've already seen it. There's surely more to come from that.
Well, there's surely more to come from the two of you, if you'll indulge us. So we'll keep you just a little longer. It is that kind of day. Well, of course, they continue to take reaction from the announcement that South Africa has a new finance minister. It's an old face, you might say. So out with the older, in with the older. We'll bring you more analysis and reaction to the appointment of former Reserve Bank Governor Tito Mboweni as South Africa's new finance minister. You're watching The Full View. Stay with us.